I'm Dr. Sandra Brown. I'm an ophthalmologist in North Carolina. I have no financial conflicts of interest. I'd like to teach you today about how the Food and Drug Administration approves biologic eye drops. And as promised in an earlier PowerPoint, you're going to get to meet the snail, who is letting us know that this is part 1 of 2 and that no shortcuts are allowed. Disclaimer: this talk is unavoidably technical. There's a limit to how snarky I can make the Code of Federal Regulations. The target audiences are eye care providers who want to recommend biologic eye drops and don't understand why they shouldn't, and patients who want to use them or maybe already do use them, don't understand the FDA approval issue, and or were advised by their eye care provider that the drops were approved or that approval is not necessary. Disclaimer number 2 is that this presentation is subject to modification because my understanding of the Code of Federal Regulations could be subject to future epiphany. Let's talk about the FDA new drug approval process. This is something I took straight off the FDA's website. You see all these arrows, different colors, different phases. You got diamonds, you got triangles. It looks complicated, lengthy, and difficult, and that is exactly what it is. But we're going to break it down for you. Step 1 is the preclinical phase. This is when you're trying out your proposed drug on cells and animals. When you think you've got enough evidence to let the FDA allow you to try it out on humans, you submit an investigational new drug application. The FDA reviews your IND application, and hopefully they say yes, because you've already invested quite a bit of money on the preclinical phase. Preclinical means not humans. If your drug is being used on humans before IND approval, this is not only illegal, but it's not counted. So if you want to submit an IND application, you do not get to bring to the FDA as evidence the fact that you've been selling it for use, and so far nobody's complained. What happens next is human clinical trials. These cost a pile of money. There are 3 phases to them, each one more and more expensive. After you've conducted your human clinical trials, and if you're optimistic, you then file a new drug application. The acronyms are pretty confusing. You've got IND, leaving off the A, which is the investigational new drug application, and then the NDA, which is the new drug application. So before your clinical trials, your drug is investigational. If you think it makes the cut, then you want it to be non-investigational. There's still no guarantee of FDA approval. And I want you to look down there at step number 11, pause the video if you need to, and you can see that facility inspection is part of this approval process. The FDA wants to make sure that you can produce this drug with consistency and purity. How about post-market? Well, maybe some of you have heard of MedWatch. MedWatch is the patient or provider reporting system for adverse events for a drug which is no longer investigational. And as somebody who's filled out some MedWatch reports, I can tell you that if you started out with hair, you will have less. The FDA complains all the time that they only receive reports of a very tiny percentage of adverse reactions. They've said this to me on the phone when I've been talking to them. And it wasn't really the topic of conversation, but I was really longing to say back to them, get your cousin Vinny to fill out a MedWatch report. Just sit next to him while he's trying to do it, and you'll realize why people try the first 3 steps and then give up and say, hey, I'm not blind or dead. I just am not going to deal with this. This is the same information in a different graphic. What I want you to pay attention to is everywhere that the FDA has to intervene. First, your drug has to be approved for testing in humans. Phase 1 is a safety phase. Does it melt your eyeballs? Phase 2 is safety and dosing. How often should you use it? How strong should it be? And then phase 3 is safety and efficacy. So it's not until you've gone through the phase 3 trials that you have any idea whether this drug works or not. Then you submit your new drug application and you wait kind of a long time to see if the FDA is going to approve you. Okay, let's get back to the topic of conversation. Regenerative medicine eye drops. Natural, biologic, magic proteins. Running through some specific products, we've got Regenerative. Manufacturer is Regenerative Processing Plant. They're an over-the-counter pretender on Daily Med. Their biologic source is placenta. They specifically describe the following protein functions: cytokines, chemokines, and growth factors. Don't worry too much about what that exactly means. We just need those words. Stimulase is actually manufactured by Neobiosis. They are the contract manufacturer. Interestingly, the FDA does not realize they are manufacturing drugs. The FDA only thinks that they're processing tissue. M2 Biologics is the front man. They have no Daily Med listing at all. Their biologic source is amniotic fluid, and they prominently discuss their cytokines, chemokines, and growth factors. Rumors are abounding about the possibility of a biologic eye drop made from amniotic membrane. They'll probably claim cytokines, chemokines, and growth factors. And then there's Lacra Complex, which is made by an Italian firm called Helix Pharma. They're not listed on Daily Med. They probably don't know it exists. The biologic source of their magic is snail mucus. I am not making this up. And despite having read several of their so-called published scientific articles, I really have no clue what they think about how this stuff works. But I can tell you that they get the snail mucus by making snails sweat. And they do reassure you in their articles that no snails are permanently harmed in the making of snail mucus sweat. They get rehydrated. I showed these two Regenerative ads in a previous PowerPoint. I'm bringing them up again because I said I would in that PowerPoint, just to show you the advertising of cytokines, chemokines, and growth factors. Stimulase, once again, growth factors, and cytokines. If you're thinking, would you get past this? Well, this is actually very critical, though, for you to understand how the FDA regulates these products. Because this is how they're regulated. They're regulated as therapeutic biologic drugs. In the most simple and straightforward text, the FDA says that therapeutic biologic products include cytokines, growth factors, and immunomodulators. And these are all protein functions that are specifically advertised by BED manufacturers. Also, anything that's extracted from animals. So there's our friend snail. Biologics go through the same approval process as any other drug. They are a subset of drugs, and therefore they're regulated under the provisions of the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which means, following initial laboratory and animal testing, you need an investigational new drug application, and then you need to have a new drug application, and then you need FDA approval. There is no short-circuiting that process by claiming that you are natural. If you remember nothing else from this PowerPoint, please remember this slide. Regenerative, Stimulase, and Lacra Complex are not FDA approved. I don't really care what your eye care provider says, which is hopefully what your eye care provider believes. These drugs are not FDA approved, period. And they should be. Just a quick recap, tying into some things that I taught you in other PowerPoints. A product which is marketed to treat a disease or medical condition, which is to say an eye drop for dry eye disease or dry eye symptoms, is regulated by the Food and Drug Administration as a drug, not a cosmetic. It requires FDA approval or over-the-counter status. And if this eye drop contains proteins from strangers, it is not going to get over-the-counter status. How about the biological source of the proteins? So far, we've got placenta, amniotic fluid, amniotic membrane, maybe snails. This means the eye drop contains growth factors, cytokines, and chemokines. And as we have seen, the Food and Drug Administration is going to regulate these products as a prescription drug. And prescription biologic drugs require a document known as a Biologics Licensing Application. Okay, bottom line. Biologic eye drops are prescription drugs. They're not over-the-counter drugs or cosmetics. Yes, they are. It does not matter where the proteins come from. It doesn't matter if they're natural. They're proteins. Doesn't matter if they came from something in your refrigerator. Gross, not impossible, but still proteins. Proteins equals prescription drug. Just remember that. Manufacturers will really try to distract you by talking about something called HCT/P. This is a pretty complicated topic. I decided it might need a separate video, and then I made the video. HCTP stands for human cell tissue or cell or tissue-derived product. A relatively small number of these products qualify for exemption from FDA regulation. This happens under extremely specific criteria. Biologic eye drops either do not qualify as HCTP products at all, so let's not start the conversation, or they do not qualify as exempt HCTP. So when a manufacturer starts throwing references to HCTP legislation at you, understand that these references are irrelevant. They're intended to sound official and reassuring and to make you stop thinking about the whole issue. Comments you may hear if you're discussing the product with telephone representatives are that it's regulated like a tissue graft, regulated like a bone graft, has a different kind of FDA approval, is regulated under PHS 361. If you have a moment and you want to have fun, give Regenerative a call. Start asking them flat out about their FDA approval status. Listen critically to what they're trying really, really hard not to say. So summing up, the current status of regenerative medicine biologic eye drops. They are all regulated by the FDA as human prescription drugs. None are approved by the FDA. Nothing is known about manufacturing consistency, which is a huge issue for me. The claims of therapeutic benefit are unproven, which constitutes misbranding. It is illegal to sell or distribute a misbranded product through interstate commerce. So I have to ask you, how much did you pay for your illegal misbranded eye drop? Because Regenerative refuses to state their dilution, so it could be 1 drop of placenta extract into 1 giant stainless steel vat of sterile water. And Stimulize, after some prodding, gave me their recipe. They have a 9% dilution. Another easy way to remember what's legit and what's not, if you can't buy it at Joe's Pharmacy, it's not an FDA approved prescription eye drop. I hope this information has been persuasive to you and that you begin to challenge statements made by your eye care provider, which may arise from their own confusion, and challenge the deceptive and deliberately vague marketing statements made by regenerative medicine manufacturers of all products, but in particular of biologic eye drops. Thank you for listening.